Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Our first story takes us into the chaotic world of industrial work, where safety rules exist, but workplace politics rule the land. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Safety issue? Guess that means you're doing all the heavy lifting now. I work at a paint factory where we make batches of around 5,000 pounds, sometimes more. We have to use forklifts in order to lift the large tanks that we make it in order to package it. I got my forklift license a couple years ago and have performed nearly every forklift task that we have to do hundreds of times. There are only 2 out of 12 workers without their forklift licenses at the plant, and those 2 are being trained. About a year ago, we created our safety committee, and I'm the member for the back of the warehouse, where we make and package the paint and where most of the workers are. We look out for any safety concerns, and if someone else has a concern or needs to make a report, we deal with that. We also do monthly and annual inspections of the premises. So our lead hand treats everybody like absolute garbage, and the boss does nothing about his behavior, his attitude, or the mistakes that he makes because they've known each other for over 30 years, including the job they worked at before here. They've been here around 20 years. We're about to start packaging an oil-based paint into 5-gallon pails like we always do. I lift up the forklift with the tank so that we can get the filter on it, and then once the others are out of the way, I start going up more so I can line it up with the trough like I've done a few hundred times with no issue. This time, however, I'd put a bit too much pressure on the gas pedal and the tank went up too fast, so I stopped it before it got too high. Doing so, however, is also dangerous because it's about 6,000 pounds of weight up in the air above the workers. Stopping it too fast could tip over the forklift and the tank of paint, causing possible heavy damage and possibly injuring someone. Going too high could also have the same result, so I slowed it and let it sit for a moment just to make sure everything was stable. The tank was not too high, the forklift didn't tilt, wobble, or make any bad sounds, and everything was perfectly fine. Lead hand, LH, backs up with his forklift in the other room and sees me checking it and begins to chew me out. I'm used to this, as are most of the co-workers, because he'll yell and scream and get PO'd at anybody who does anything even minutely wrong or in a different way than what he's done for 20 years. He repeats himself multiple times, telling me why it's unsafe, which I'd already acknowledged and stated that I realized what I'd done and what negative effects it could have had. He goes back to the other side and then comes over once more to repeat it a few more times. All I can say is I am well aware as I continue getting everything ready for packaging. He takes this as personally as if I killed his dog, goes to the boss and tells him the forklift's back tires were lifted off the ground and that we had to stabilize it, otherwise it would have fallen. The other 2 members of the safety committee start an investigation, talking to the guys that were there. Only one had seen what happened, and he stated that everything was fine and that we didn't need to stabilize, nor did the tires lift off. A week later, we started getting the packaging ready, and I get onto the forklift to get it prepared. LH comes running over saying that it's a safety issue and that he's driving. I tell him I'm more than capable, and his response is that he needs me, not the other 3 guys standing there who normally do it, to guide him forward. I just go along with it until after the packaging is done, and then I say to him that because he stated that it's a safety issue, I'll need to bring it up with the other committee members so that they can start an investigation on how to mitigate the safety issue and make it more safe, as is my job whenever someone has a safety concern or issue. His response is aggressive at first, telling me he doesn't care, that it's already done, go ahead, etc., until he tells me that the boss told LH that he was to be the only one lifting up tanks from now on. I tell him that's fine, but I still need to bring it up with the committee since he stated it was a safety issue, and he just grumbled and walked away. Since then, anytime we have a tank to lift, anywhere from full to empty, I stand there and wait for him to come and do it, sometimes telling him to come and do it, and whenever he tells me to do it, I just repeat what he said about the boss stating that LH is the only one allowed to do so, and continuing to wait until he does it. This is an ongoing thing still, and will be for a very long time, unless we're told otherwise by the boss. I love when someone makes themselves so relevant to perform a task that no one else can, will, should, and then get annoyed when they have to actually do said thing. usually ends up backfiring on said person one way or another. And our second story. When my mom's fence disappeared and the neighbors refused to replace it. My 80-year-old mother owns a small bungalow with a modest rear garden. It's not much, but she loves it. For years, a sturdy wooden fence separated her garden from the holiday cottage next door. The fence was perfectly fine, upright, in good condition, and structurally sound. The only thing growing on it was some ivy that had come up from their side of the property. Then one morning, my mom stepped outside to feed the birds and saw a man demolishing the fence. My mother, being the sweet, polite woman she is, didn't immediately panic. Instead, she walked over and asked the man what he was doing. "Oh, your neighbors hired me to replace the fence," he said, cheerfully, barely pausing from his work. She was surprised, but not alarmed. Maybe the neighbors had decided to upgrade the fence and were paying for it themselves? How nice of them. So instead of stopping him, my mother offered him some tea, had a little chat, and let him carry on. By the end of the day, the fence was gone. That was it. No new fence, just an empty boundary line. Months passed, no fence appeared. Then one day, the neighbor finally showed up. Since it was a holiday cottage, they weren't there often, so this was the first time my mom had had a chance to ask about it. She was in her garden when the neighbor woman called over, cheerfully tidying up her own property. "Oh, by the way," the neighbor casually mentioned, "turns out that fence was actually on your land. So it was your responsibility all along." What? The neighbor went on to explain that since it wasn't their fence, they wouldn't be replacing it, and that my mother was now responsible for putting up a new one. My mom, who isn't the type to argue, simply said, "Oh, I see. I'll have to speak to my son about that." That's where I came in. I visit my mom regularly, but since the neighbors only use their house as a holiday cottage, I never saw them when I stopped by. My mom also had no contact details for them, which made addressing the issue difficult. So I did what any reasonable and irritated person would do. I did a search on Land Registry to find the owners of the neighboring property and got their contact information. Then I wrote them a letter, a polite but firm one. In that letter, I made it clear that the fence was indeed my mother's property, explained that they had unlawfully removed it without her permission, stated that they were responsible for replacing it, and let them know that all correspondence was being kept as evidence. To cover my bases, I kept copies of every single thing I sent them. After receiving my letter, the neighbors suddenly became very cooperative. I suspect they spoke to a solicitor and realized they had seriously screwed up. They didn't argue, they didn't deny it, they simply agreed to replace the fence. So in the end, my mother got a brand new fence, paid for entirely by the people who tore it down. This neighbor deliberately tore down the fence, knowing full well they weren't going to replace it. The whole, "Oh, turns out it was your fence all along" excuse? That was planned. And our last story. HOA Karen demolished my granny's house. I knew something was wrong even before I saw it. Anxiety crawled under my skin, tightening in my chest as I turned onto the street where my grandmother lived. I'd grown up in this neighborhood. I knew every crack in the pavement, every leaning fence. What I saw ahead didn't fit the image from my childhood. Her house was gone. In its place was a pile of splintered wood, shattered glass, and dust. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car. I couldn't believe my eyes. The home where I'd spent my childhood, where Grandma baked the most delicious pies, where the air smelled of her lavender perfume, it was destroyed. A bulldozer stood nearby, its engine still rumbling. Workers shuffled nervously, avoiding eye contact. One of them, wearing a helmet and a frozen expression, was clutching some papers as if they contained the answer to everything that had happened. "Who's in charge here?" I barked, stepping forward. The guy in the helmet swallowed nervously. We received orders. The house was scheduled for demolition," he mumbled. I snatched the papers from his hands. It was the wrong address. They had demolished the wrong house. My heart pounded violently. "Have you lost your damn minds? That was my grandmother's house. Where is she?" No one answered. One of the workers slowly stepped back, hoping to slip away unnoticed. I grabbed him by the collar. "Where is my grandmother?" She was taken to a nursing home," he muttered. "That's what they told us." I let him go and immediately dialed the number. The HOA office secretary answered on the second ring. "Crestwood Homeowners Association, this is Lisa. How may I help you?" "I need your president, immediately." Mrs. Whitman's in a meeting right now. May I?" You're going to get up right now, Lisa, walk into that damn room and tell her if she doesn't talk to me within 5 minutes, I'll come there myself. And believe me, then she'll have a much bigger problem. Silence. I could hear her swallow nervously. 1 moment, sir. I waited, staring at the ruins of my grandmother's house. After a minute, Lisa returned to the line. Mrs. Whitman will see you now. Good, I'm on my way. I stormed into her office without knocking. The door slammed against the wall, Lisa barely jumping out of the way. Karen Whitman, a well-groomed woman with a predatory smile, sat behind an enormous wooden desk holding a coffee cup as if this were an ordinary day. Mister, she drawled lazily, I hope you have an appointment. I didn't sit down. Instead, I walked straight to her desk and placed the demolition papers in front of her. Is this my address? I asked calmly. Karen glanced briefly at the papers, then back at me. Her smug smile wavered slightly, but she quickly regained composure. Mistakes happen, she shrugged. I'm sure your grandmother's in a nice place. A nursing home's probably even better for her. My fists clenched. I knew if I punched her right now, my career would go straight to hell, so I simply leaned closer. You've made a huge mistake, Karen, I whispered, and I'll prove it. She laughed. What are you going to do, file a complaint? Go ahead, litigation takes years. You'll lose, officer. I smiled back, coldly, without a hint of humor. You think I need bureaucracy to bring you down? I said quietly, leaning even closer. You have friends in the administration, don't you? People who've turned a blind eye to your schemes. Karen didn't reply, but her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. See, I have some friends too. Detective Dawson from Financial Crimes loves digging through paperwork, especially forged documents. I slowly pulled out my phone, deliberately scrolling through contacts. How long do you think it'll take before your office is raided with a warrant? You're bluffing, Karen hissed, but then there was a faint note of doubt in her voice. Try me. I hit call. The other end picked up immediately. Dawson, said the voice. I've got a present for you, I said, never taking my eyes off Karen. Remember that case 5 years ago, missing developers, shady real estate deals? I think I found your connection. Karen turned pale. She stood quickly, trying to maintain dignity. You can't just accuse me. You need evidence. I have it, I replied calmly, and soon the investigation division will too. Karen lunged for her phone. I need to make a call. I circled the desk, placed my hand over hers, sliding the phone away. No, Karen, you'll have plenty of time for calls after you're arrested. The door opened and 2 detectives walked in with my partner. I stepped back, letting them take control. Karen Whitman, you're under arrest on suspicion of fraud, abuse of power, and illegal real estate dealings, announced the detective officially. You have the right to remain silent. She stared at me with undisguised hatred. Her reign was over. Crestwood Estates was no longer her kingdom. I looked at her and quietly added, it wasn't your decision, it was the law. They took her away. I took a deep breath, looking at the ruins of my grandmother's house. It wouldn't bring back her cozy home or my childhood memories, but at least justice had prevailed. Somebody's going to have to learn to live in prison for a long time. Someone's going to have to learn to live in prison for a long time. Someone with a name starting with K and ending with Aaron. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.